So when you're angry at your child, you can repair that quite quickly. But when you come raging at your teen for a poor choice, you then shut that down, you shame them, you make them feel worse, you make them feel unloved, you make them feel unsafe.
Today, we have the immense pleasure of speaking with Maggie Dent, one of Australia's most beloved parenting authors and educators. Her latest book, Help Me Help My Teen, is a must read for anyone navigating the often challenging teenage years. So, if you're feeling a bit lost in the world of adolescence or just looking for ways to strengthen your relationship with your teen, you're in the right place. Welcome, Maggie.
Oh, thanks for having me.
First question. What do you see is the biggest challenge facing today's teens?
Unfortunately, it's not just one challenge, Melody. It's the fact that our world has changed so much since you were teens and since I was raising teens. And I think we know they're struggling more. So there's a bit of a journey to that point. And the first one is we've kind of changed childhood in so many ways. We got immersed by, being frightened that our children will get hurt. So we kind of became, shall we say, a little more overprotective, which comes from love. However, it didn't allow our kids to stretch and grow as much as previous generations. So we find they're less resilient to difficult challenges, disappointment, letdowns, failure, all of those things. And then when they get to this bumpy ride, which has always been a bumpy ride, all for hyper reasons, they're less able to navigate some of the things that would have distressed us and upset us as well. And then on top of it, these are digital natives. They've been raised around our screens. They've been raised in what we call a virtual world. And sadly, some of them have seen content no child or even any adult should see. So when you put that into sensitive nervous systems with a cognitive incapacity to manage it, even I can't manage awful images. And also the fact that, we went through a pandemic as well, which separated everyone. They missed out on some vital growth in terms of connection. Then we can see there's a few factors that lead towards more of our teens, and a really beginning part of the book as I looked at it right around the world. And they're struggling everywhere in the world, in the Western world particularly. And that's why I just felt I can't retire from writing these books until I could go back and offer one last book that may be able to help parents really come alongside our teens so that we can support them, especially through the biggest bumpy moments that can possibly happen.
The teen years are it's a bit of a tricky age group, isn't it? Because, they're children, but not, and then they're adults, but not as well. So how can parents balance giving, their teens that independence, but still guiding them as parents?
Yeah, such a good one. I think if we can look at the why of also sometimes why they're more difficult and they don't kind of listen to us possibly as well as they may have before they were 10, is because the emerging, hunger for autonomy and choice is a biological drive, because you're making a future adult. You're not just raising a child. And so it's a biological drive inside them. And I think if you can even start before the tween and teen years of every now and then, negotiating with them or having conversations like even after school pickups or something. So can you tell me what works for you tomorrow and I'll see how it fits for me? So we can see that we have got this possibility of negotiated space because we know that nobody, not including a toddler, likes being told what to do. We are wired as humans for counter will, which is pushback. And so the more that we're commanded and demanded, the more we're likely, especially in adolescence, to push back and to be more rebellious. So it is a really, and it shifts at all different angles too, Melody. So girls go into, puberty earlier than boys, and then they are often more mindful before they make choices, and boys are far more impulsive. And so, there is a lot of differences. There's not a one size fits all navigating, helping your teen over this really bumpy ride. And it's really a bit sad that we now know that your executive brain that makes great decisions, which we really wish they could do from 12, isn't fully finished and for girls about 22 to 23, but boys were 25 to 27. However, if they've been online in a digital space a lot of the time over their boyhood, it is closer to 30. So we can see that, once again, when you say, what were you thinking? Often there is no thinking. And that is actually developmentally exactly what is happening in that window.
What you're saying is interesting. It echoes another book that I've just recently read from a neuroscientist, and he was talking about the 10 to 25 age gap, and that's really the age gap where it's still forming, it's still developing, but yet it's a time in which they really want the autonomy as well.
Yeah. And I think if I can just touch on a couple of things in terms of how that, because we've got changes on every level, and any change for us as humans, no matter what age, triggers the amygdala go, are we going to survive? So it's a really stressful thing because most of the changes they don't even know are happening, and they didn't ask for them to happen. And so when they get up and they're moody and they're difficult to communicate with, they're not intentionally getting out of bed to plan that. And secondly, when we look at, changing on that cognitive capacity, you can't make great decisions until your brain is flooded with the beautiful thing called myelin, which is the fatty white substance. When there's a lot of that, we pause, we plan for the future, we motivate ourselves, we have more empathy and compassion. All of those things are gradually growing as they merge towards those years in the 20s. However, the really trickiest window for all parents to understand is the early stage of puberty. Remember, girls go earlier, but for boys, it's kind of 13 to 15. But anything under 15 or 16, the first thing the brain does, it goes, heck, we've got to change this inefficient child brain into an adult brain. So let me prune off what they're not using. Now, for anyone who lives with boys will know they're not as good at their memory, and their organization skills are definitely not as good as girls. So imagine when that gets pruned. So, that's a really frustrating window because they weren't good to start with. And then when they go into the next little bit, at the same time that's happening, the inner critic inside our kids gets louder and louder. So they get drowned in the messages they're telling themselves. And for girls, once again, it's a really difficult window because body dissatisfaction has always been a part of puberty for girls. And now they're drowning in a world where they're compared to things that are, well, often digitally altered in the first place. And they're marinated in thinness messages and beauty messages and sexy messages that previous generations didn't get. And then for our boys, of course, in this window, we might get really frustrated. I mean, I raised 4 of them. I know how tricky it was, but I also taught co-ed. So helping boys to remember things that you might have said just 5 minutes before in a class might seem like I shouldn't have to, but it can help them perform and stay on track. So I think that's a big window. And then in that same window that they're often self-loathing and self-hatred, and I was in that window very much, and that was before phones and things. The brain is making massive growth of another incredible thing, and that's the dendrite bits, because no matter where we've been raising children, in this window, you have to learn very fast how to survive, whether as a boy, you've got to kill things, and as females, we were conditioned, you've got to help keep everyone else alive from babies to elderly, and you've got to help find food, and so we have to learn fast, which is really exciting because they can learn a language really quickly. They can learn anything really quickly. And if they throw their energy into it, they improve drastically, which is so exciting to know that, because often sometimes they're pulling away from things because they don't feel good about themselves. And also, they can learn quickly, but they can become addicted far quicker in that window than any other window in our life, which is why they need us parents as their rails on the bridge with boundaries, until at least 16, when we might then negotiate some shifts in the boundaries. But can you see what I worry when people go, oh, look, they've just got to go and work it out themselves? Well, after 15 or 16 is a much better time than before that. And they still need us to kind of help them when they make those really poor choices because they haven't really considered all the options.
Before we continue, I want to take a moment to point you to an incredibly valuable resource. If you've ever faced that heart-stopping moment when you discover something like a vape in your teen's bag and unsure what to do next, Maggie has you covered. On our website, you can find an extract from her book, Help Me Help My Teen, specifically addressing the situation. Just head over to momsatathetable.com after the interview to read the full extract.
Beautiful.
Now,
Thank you.
we're going to talk about your book, Help Me Help My Teen. It's kind of separated into two parts. The first is an overview on the developmental changes, the psychological drivers, emotional journeys teens go through when they become teens. The second part, however, is a very practical guide on what parents can do when faced with particularly curly situations they find themselves in. So there's about 17 different scenarios, from what to do when you find out your teen is sexually active, what to do when you discover your teen is intentionally self-harming, and the one we've included on our website, what to do when you find a vape in your teen's bag. How did you decide on those 17 scenarios, and what's your approach?
Well, I was a teacher and a counselor for, a very long time. And the sorts of experiences in there, I guess there's only about 3 or 4 that are relatively new because they're the same things that all teens have struggled with. It's not like Einstein stuff here. It is exactly what they do when they push back. And one of those other things is we know that when our teens particularly muck up, and make a choice that can threaten their safety. So all of these are potentially about their threatening their safety. And the number one thing we do, even if it's a toddler in the supermarket, if we just temporarily lose them, we are wired to be angry first. So when you're angry at your child, you can repair that quite quickly. But when you come raging at your teen for a poor choice, you then shut that down, you shame them, you make them feel worse, you make them feel unloved, you make them feel unsafe. And one of the disturbing figures in Australia, and I have, seen the figures in New Zealand that are very similar, is the number one killer of 14 to 25-year-olds is suicide. And when I have sat with teens who've tried to end their life and fortunately were unsuccessful, they tend to say these 3 things: is that I don't matter, no one cares, and the world would be better off without me. So those are the 3 things that anytime we come at them really hard, thinking like in previous terms that if I punish them, they will learn. No, they don't. Punishment doesn't teach anything. And that's what I've got in this book. We're going to come alongside our teen who's really mucked up. And I'm not going to rescue them. I'm not going to fix them. No, because how are they learning to prepare to be that adult one day? Is we come alongside them with great information and we go, so can you see this is some of the reasons why this is probably something I want you to think about more. And, what is your plan going forward? Because as soon as we expand that, we've got them on board. But it also means that when the really big stuff might happen, and it's not always them, sometimes it's their friends. I've had friends who've had car accidents and and their friends were in the other car. They've called their parents because they know that boy can't call his because they won't come. So we have to keep saying to them, there's nothing you can do. Nothing will stop me loving you, and we won't have your back. And we're going to, so anytime your first thought is call mum, call dad, not don't call my folks. We have to sow that seed in so deeply in them. I believe we'll turn around those big figures. And I know that if they know there's a safe base, they look for it and they want to land on it.
Reminds me of what another parenting expert used to say, that I love you isn't the 3 most important words. It's what comes after,
That's it, no matter what. That's exactly what. And it's interesting because I've been presenting it at seminars. There's so many tears from parents in these seminars, so many tears, and I'm telling them all to go home and write love notes to their teens. But they've often come up and said, can you get me a t-shirt with no matter what on it? Just because I need to stay. I want to remind them, and, it's really hard when they've made the same foolish choice that has caused harm to themselves or someone else. And they've done it a few times and you're thinking, Wah! And there's one thing in it, this message is while punishment doesn't teach, there does need to be some consequences for repeated poor choices. So I often talk about the 3-strike system, where we'll remind somebody, like, that's the second time I've asked you not to do that. And, and the second time we let them know what the consequence will be, that I heard you swearing while you were playing that game with your friends, and that language isn't okay in our house. So if you're unable to change that, well, we'll just have 24 hours when you're not able to game with your friends. That'll be like a lifetime, right? 24 hours. And immediately they're motivated to come back and change their behavior. It's not because you hurt them, it's you made them mildly uncomfortable and they haven't been able to, you still have the rails on the bridge. And they need to know that what you're doing is for their betterment, even if they don't agree with you. But we don't take it away from a week. Every now and then I hear parents do it for a week. You'll just have the angriest teen if you remove something for such a long period of time when they're a digital native. Same with social media for your girls. If you take it away too long, you could destroy that perception that you are their safe base. So it's a slightly different way, because we were raised with behaviorism in the previous, generations, that, if we reward you when you do good, well, sticker charts don't work for teenagers. And I can tell you now.
It's interesting what you said as well about how you chose the scenarios, that it's not new. It's kind of it's comforting as well to know that, and because then you've got that many years of research behind you on how to deal with it today.
Yeah, the art of communicating, like, I think we still, it's natural for us as parents to kind of talk down to our kids, but this is an emerging adult. I mean, some of them are 6'4" when they're 13, aren't they? But also the capacity for them to be able to, reflect and think about things. There is actually a deeper side inside them. And I get really cross when people just bag teenagers so much. So my job was, as their counselor particularly, was to let them know that there's, 3 parts to the personality. You've got an ego, and our ego is the thing with that voice. And it's not all of who we are. It's a little bit of what we are. And then under that is a shadow where we bury our deepest pains and fears and phobias and things like that. And at the center, there is the human spirit, whatever we want to call it. I call it an inner compass, the wise voice within, and those with faith. It's, God essence, whatever you want to call it. It is inside them. However, it whispers so quietly. And our job is to help them hear that voice, not just the loud voices. So I brought calmness into my classrooms and all my counseling after I had clarified what the challenge was for them through that, very much the scripts I've included in the book. I'd say, let's have a listen to what's going on inside you. What does your heart say? What do you feel is the right thing? Like, it's unbelievable when they've heard it within themselves, because they're not damaged, they're not broken, they're not flawed. They're just temporarily a little bit lost for all of the reasons that we explained at the beginning of the book. And when they come up and they go, oh, I can see that now. And that's really a really huge part of the way we're asking questions, and why quite often we say, look, okay, I can see this is pretty big. How about we have a chat on the weekend? I want you to give it some thought and we'll have a chat on the weekend. What we do is, when we give the higher self a little bit more time to come on up and to be heard, they quite often in that time frame, you'll find they've already shifted that defensive, I know what I'm doing and nothing wrong is ever going to happen, and I'm invincible. Yeah, they often go, yeah, no, you're right. I think it's not a good idea.
We're going to finish up soon, so just wondering if you wanted to share a final thought.
Now, final thought is, it's not just about us and raising our teens, is that every single one of us in our village can actually shine light into a troubled teen's life. And I'm that notion is the lighthouse figure. It is significant adult allies. And sometimes they're extended family, sometimes they're teachers, sometimes they're coaches, sometimes they can be a neighbor. I want you to know that sometimes just one conversation where you sow a seed of hope and you connect and let them feel seen and heard can absolutely change a young person's life. But instead, they seem to just be getting more and more darkness. And we know that when it gets super dark, that increases the chances of the self-harm or the suicide. So we can all step forward and shine more light into that really bumpy ride for our tweens and teens in today's crazy world.
Some good thoughts there, with the rails as well as the lighthouse. It's really, really great imagery and it's so easy to remember.
Thank you.
But thank you for your thoughts and thank you for your time.
Thank you so much for having me.
As mentioned, you can find out more about Maggie's book, Help Me Help My Teen, in the description. And for Maggie's tips on what to do if your teen is vaping, as well as content on how to raise happy, healthy children, head over to our website, momsattethetable.com.